At the end of October, Disney will be releasing multiple versions of two of their classic games. The Lion King in its Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, and Game Boy forms, along with Aladdin in its Sega Genesis and Game Boy forms. Looking at that list, it is clear that the gang's all here, except for one. What follows is a tale of licensing woes and excellent level design, all tied up in one Aladdin game that for now is lost to time. I'm John Reardon, you're watching NWR TV, and this is Disney's Missing Aladdin game. In 1992, Disney released the animated film Aladdin. Although it has fallen out of favor as game development has become more and more expensive, at the time it seemed like most major film releases were accompanied by a video game. Aladdin was no different. For both this project and The Lion King, Disney partnered with Virgin Interactive. Virgin's version of Aladdin released in 1993 and was famous for its implementation of Digicel technology. This allowed animation cells drawn by actual Disney animators to be used in the game. Essentially think of Digicel as the cartoon equivalent to the 3D models used in Donkey Kong or even the live-action actors in Mortal Kombat. As such, when Aladdin released on the Sega Genesis, it was quite a looker. It would later be ported to the NES. This version would also be ported to the Game Boy, and a Game Boy Color port would be developed by Crawfish Interactive and published by Ubisoft. Interestingly, the Game Boy Color version is not present on Disney's forthcoming re-release, but rather the Super Game Boy version of the standard Game Boy release. Amidst all of this, you'll likely notice one major platform missing. In fact, it was the most popular gaming system in the world in 1993. The Super Nintendo never received Virgin's technically groundbreaking Aladdin game, but it was not without its own Aladdin adaptation. In the mid-1980s, Capcom obtained an exclusive license from Disney to develop all of their games for Nintendo home consoles. While the exact terms of the agreement are not known, it was likely set to last about 10 years, ending at the end of 1993, just after the release of the Aladdin video games. This is not only why Virgin would develop Nintendo's next Super Nintendo release, The Lion King, but also why in 1994, the Genesis version of Aladdin was ported to the NES and Game Boy. This agreement between Disney and Capcom ultimately resulted in some of the best licensed games of the third and fourth generation of game consoles. DuckTales, Goof Troop, and of course, a very different version of Aladdin. Aladdin on Super Nintendo, outside of being a platformer and allowing the player to throw apples, is entirely unlike its Genesis counterpart. In contrast to the Genesis game, which placed a major focus on combat with a sword, Capcom's game focuses on parkour. Aladdin can jump on the heads of most enemies to defeat them, leading detractors to refer to Capcom's game as a Mario clone. In reality, however, Aladdin's moveset is quite unique for the time. Aladdin can of course run and jump, but he can also grab ledges, bounce off of enemies and environmental elements, swing, and glide using a makeshift parachute. Things start simply, with the parkour elements being used to reach optional areas and collectible red jewels, rather than being required to finish a level. Aladdin can swing up to a higher area and gain access to the parachute, or time a bounce off a stake with perfect timing to enter a bonus minigame at the end of the level. The second stage adds swinging platforms. Aladdin can hang from the edge of these to collect items floating above an abyss. A zip line allows Aladdin to go flying over alleyways and careen into the waiting face of an enemy. Each stage introduces new elements that can change the focus of traversal to make Aladdin's moveset more and more essential to progression. Impressively, many of these elements are unique to individual stages or environments. One section of the Cave of Wonders features logs floating on a river beneath the entire stage. Genie's lamp has balloons that can be bounced off of but will pop, meaning they can only be used once. Later, sand flows along the floor of the stage, manipulating Aladdin's movement and speed. There are no filler stages in Aladdin on Super Nintendo. Every single level has a purpose. Each one proposes a unique challenge for the player to overcome. The entire game is only about an hour long. It is an incredibly refined and tight experience built around a firm concept. But beyond functioning as a great game, Capcom's game mechanics fall perfectly in line with the film upon which it is based. Aladdin is a street rat. He steals food and then runs across rooftops to outwit the palace guards. He's quick, clever, and nimble. He isn't a warrior, and he only wields a sword for one brief moment at the end of the film. Virgin made a great and visually impressive game, but Capcom goes to great efforts to design mechanics around the source material. Virgin's Aladdin game could be sprite swapped with any other character in the world, and it would carry nothing of Aladdin over with it. Capcom's version, however, brings with it an intrinsic element of its source within its most basic design. And regardless of which version you prefer, their effort is worthy of praise. Now, it's obvious why the Super Nintendo version of Aladdin is not included in Disney's re-release. Unlike the many other versions of Aladdin and The Lion King, it would have to be licensed from a separate company. Meanwhile, Virgin's games appear to have passed into the ownership of EA, with whom Disney already has a positive working relationship thanks to the Star Wars license. In 2003, Capcom re-released the Super Nintendo game itself on Game Boy Advance. Outside of a few Disney songs that were used in the original version of the game that aren't in the Game Boy Advance version, Capcom seems to have maintained publishing rights. There is a chance then that somehow it could wind up on the Switch Online or in a collection similar to Capcom's 2017 release, the Disney Afternoon Collection. But for now, this excellent adaptation of Aladdin will remain on the SNES, or a rather expensive Game Boy Advance cartridge. So whether you prefer it on the Genesis or SNES, when Disney releases their collection of Aladdin and Lion King, pour one out for this lost Capcom masterpiece. Thank you very much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to Nintendo World Report TV and checking out NintendoWorldReport.com for a whole lot more. If you'd like to chat with us, there's a link to our Discord down in the description. You can follow me on Twitter at JTSKnight92 and stick around for information on our Patreon. Once again, I'm John Rairdon, and I will see you next time. This video was made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Did you know that Nintendo World Report is funded directly by fans like you? When you support Nintendo World Report on Patreon, you get immediate access to multiple exclusive podcasts every month, exclusive Discord channels, an early look at select content, and more, all for as little as $1 a month. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.